Hello, and thank you for joining us today for today's panel on solutions to workforce issues in the seasonal tourism sector. My name is Kevin Quigley. I'm a professor of the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The McEachern Institute for Public Policy and Governance is hosting today's panel as part of our ongoing work with the tourism sector in Atlantic Canada. Over the past 18 months, the McEachern Institute has hosted over 10 scenario planning sessions with various organizations involved in tourism. Our most recent project was in partnership with the Atlantic Canada Cruise Association and was supported by ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. Through the scenario planning sessions with the Cruise Association, the sector identified labor shortages as seasonal workforce to be of primary concern for the resumption of cruises in the region in 2022. Today's panel is being recorded and will be available on the McEachern Institute YouTube page. Generally speaking, the viewers of today's panel are a professional audience. Most people work in the sector. After the opening remarks from the panelists, there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. We ask the questions be directed to a specific person on the panel. The cruise industry injects more than $2 billion into the Canadian economy and supports about 30,000 jobs across the country. The industry anticipated another year of growth for 2020, including Atlantic Canada, which had experienced a 52% increase in cruise passenger arrivals between 2016 and 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has resulted in the suspension of 2 consecutive cruise seasons for the region, which has also impacted the tourism sector and related businesses. While Atlantic Canada has fared better than other parts of Canada and maintains a reputation as a safe destination, the uncertainty associated with COVID-19 and the rebound of tourism and cruise poses significant challenges for the industry. One of the primary challenges the tourism sector faces is, of course, labor shortage, and this came up in fairly repeated fashion in our scenario planning exercises that we carried out with the cruise sector and the related businesses. In 2016, the Canadian Tourism Research Institute estimated that over 240,000 tourism-related jobs could become vacant between 2010 and 2035, which equals about 10% of all tourism jobs. These shortages are caused partly due to the declining population. Workforce perception about the sector could also be contributing to its labor shortages. Lower wages, limited career advancement and opportunities, and the temporary and seasonal nature of the work are among the characteristics that can often deter people from working in the sector. So today we've invited a number of distinguished speakers from a variety of organizations to help us identify the challenges for the sector and propose solutions. Our first speaker is Professor Tony Fang. Professor Fang is the Stephen Jaroslawski Chair in Economics and Cultural Transformation at Memorial University of Newfoundland and an adjunct professor with the University of Toronto. Prior to joining Memorial, he was the director of the Master of International Business program at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, and a professor in the School of Human Resource Management at York University in Toronto. Professor Fang was part of an expert advisory committee on migration and development for the World Bank from 2014 to 2019. He's the lead author of a 2021 research series entitled According to Atlantic Employers, funded by ACOA and the Newfoundland Workforce Innovation Centre, focusing on workforce issues crucial for economic growth priorities in Atlantic Canada, such as retention, skills, hiring, immigrant integration. So Tony, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me. I mean, I'm quite impressed by the series of discussion about the reopening of the tourism industry in Atlantic Canada, and of course, this is very important industry. It's about $4 million revenue and 10% our workforce, and so we are at the tail end of the season. I know the federal government lifted the ban as of November 1st. We are hopeful for the reopening probably earliest next spring, maybe even summer. So the number of challenges I can anticipate from the prospective workforce issues, notably, the potential risk of another new variants of the COVID, so-called Omicron, as we anticipated, it might be additional issue with the, public health and, potential lockdown of the industry for a little bit longer period of time. And the other issues that, the government in response to the pandemic have provided very generous benefits related to the COVID relief, which actually, of course, on one hand, will provide support to vulnerable group, but on the other hand, would generate so-called, disincentive for employment, especially for domestic workers. As a result, a lot of this kind of so-called frontline industry jobs in, the hotel, restaurant, agriculture, fishery, a lot of seasonal jobs in this Atlantic Canada were actually occupied by, temporary foreign workers, international students, and recent immigrants and so on. And so, but because the travel restrictions, even both federal government, provincial government have set very ambitious targets for immigrant intakes, but we actually experience quite lower numbers of newcomers, international students from last year. So that certainly create more challenges in terms of labor skill shortages for the industry. And along with that is the seasonal nature of the jobs, right? And low wages, Kevin mentioned, the low benefits and so on. And for temporary foreign workers and international students might also be issue of how to recognize the employment experiences for potential credits for permanent residence application. So just putting it all together, I think it's a lot of issues related to the workforce challenges for the upcoming reopening of the industry. So I'm just making some kind of, I know we have number of distinguished experts in the field. So just put forth some kind of ideas, general ideas, potential solutions. For example, my areas of immigration, of course, we will be hoping that we could, both federal government, provincial government, and also the industry could take concerted efforts by providing more, wage subsidies, maybe even, additional benefits, for example, tuition support for international students, combining, a couple of seasonal job, part-time jobs, so that, it could boost income for those workers in the industry, but also give them more credits for permanent residence, application. So I'm going to stop here now. I'm hoping to join the discussion a little bit later.
Thanks, Tony. We now shift to Dr. Candace Blaney. Dr. Blaney is a tenured associate professor in tourism and hospitality management at Mount St. Vincent University. Candace holds an MBA from Athabasca University and a PhD from Arizona's North Central University. Dr. Blaney belongs to provincial, national, international associations and has years of experience in the tourism industry, including 10 years at Holiday Inns of Canada as Regional Director of Human Resources. Candace, thanks so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. And thank you, Tony, for getting us started off. And you're right, you've identified a large number of challenges. So I'm going to share my screen. I do have a short PowerPoint here. Share. Okay. Yes, the solutions are going to be tough. It's been easy, and I'm sure with the scenario planning, there is no magic bullet. There's a lot of areas and variables that have led us to kind of where we are now. What I wish to do is just take you through a little bit of our situation at the university level, and I'm probably even going to touch on a couple of things that Tony has also said. So we have 3 credentials that we offer for students that are looking for careers in the tourism industry. Of course, there's the degree, which takes about 4 years, the diploma about 2, and the certificate, which is just over 1 year. We do have work experience or co-op that is a mandatory part. The industry has told us they want people to have experience. And so in our degree, it's 3 work terms, so it works very well within the seasonal work frame. Of course, once students graduate, though, they are then looking for different careers, not necessarily seasonal. So the work terms run during our high season. We post early. One of the things we also do is our students don't have to come back until after Thanksgiving, because we know in the industry, September and the fall area can be quite busy. And so we have offered condensed courses. Some students even will stay on with their co-op employer in a part-time basis. And of course, with we for years have always offered online, and our tourism degree is 100% right now that can be taken online. Of course, COVID has pushed a lot of us into that type of scenario. So we do post early, and we want our students to have their jobs secured fairly early. Saying that, we know it's going to be high competition this year. We know, we have a large number of employers that are trying to get ahead of the curve. And as Tony mentioned, universities and colleges have been depending on a high number of international students. And we recruit internationally. We also recruit quite aggressively domestically by creating partnerships and relationships with community colleges and also at high school. So we try to get people thinking about tourism. Tourism curriculum is in high school at the 11 and 12 stage. We actually work with some of those teachers, and I know TIANS, our Tourism Industry Association, also works with those teachers to support those that are teaching tourism. Tony mentioned about the drop in international students. This just gives you one indication. In 2020, we lost 50% of our international students on the ground. And most of that's been, visa applications, just banned entry. We've had some very students that were not swayed by that, actually, from India, that we had one student went through 4 countries and 2 isolations just to get her feet on the ground in Halifax. In general, and again was mentioned, COVID has kind of been a way of making people stop to think about a future in tourism because it was devastated so greatly. But even before COVID, tourism, we've always had a concern with it being recognized as a profession. And sometimes dealing with parents, it's difficult because they don't see the future of it. So just some possible ways of attracting students to jobs that the industry may be posting. Using descriptive titles, trying to give them as much information as you can. We always, sometimes the students will come to us and say, I'm not sure what this job is. What does this title mean? Other things like, flexibility and scheduling. We know some of our younger students don't want the 9 to 5 or want more flexibility to do some other things. We know benefits sometimes should be highlighted above just the salary, because some students don't really realize those hidden benefits behind the job. And there has been some research out there, BDC, business development, 57% of people do leave for higher wages and 32% for benefits. So there is some statistics out there that are saying, yes, money is important. And we know the minimum wage discussion has been around for quite a while. Other things that will attract students, you can be a bit creative. For rural industries, we're seeing that housing and transportation are 2 major issues. I think an issue even within Halifax is our public transportation just doesn't allow our students to be able to get to some areas. We've had students not being able to get to Dartmouth because it takes them an hour and a half by bus if they live on this side, you know, the other side. So public transportation, I think, is something. So some groups are looking at carpooling, shuttling, anything that can make it easier for people to move around. Also, students, what they're looking for is some development. They like to have variety and maybe not just in one job. The thing with co-op is also we like to see progression in our students as they work through. So by their third job, it's usually their leaping off point. Some of our other challenges, I think we're all facing these. One of the things we come across a lot is federal grants do not include our international students, which really tends to cut us off at the knees at being able to provide our students with some of the benefits of those grants, whether they're projects. Seawell is a one we're working with right now. I'm on a project. It took me a long time to get the number of students for that project because they had to be Canadian. Propel is another one that basically you have to be Canadian. The provincial grants, however, do include international students. And there's a couple of examples. There's the co-op education incentive. And actually, if you hire an international student, you'll get the $9 subsidy. Or another minority group. And there's also the graduate to opportunity out there, but I'm still not sure if that one's still running. Sometimes these government programs come and go, and it's hard to track them down sometimes and go through it. The other thing is with immigration, our international students, if they're not in a work term, can only work 20 hours a week. And I've had students that have left the degree program, finished off with a diploma because they can't survive on 20 hours a week to be able to pay themselves. And so that is another area that, you know, for policy, those are challenges. One of the things on the positive side, though, is if you ask students why they work in the industry, I just did a quick survey yesterday and I asked them the question, why do you love the industry? Why do you love working in it? You'll see that this is one quote. It talks about the people, they're really, you know, interested in meeting people. And a group of quotes is, you know, they want the opportunities, they like the variety, they like the challenge. They like to be in control of the situation, to be able to make decisions that can make somebody's experience better. So these are just quotes that I got back from about 10 students yesterday. And I just thought it gives us a little insight into why they're in the industry and maybe how we can keep them. So I am done and back over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Candace. You've reminded me that one of my first jobs was in tourism and I loved it. I have to say, I loved it. And I always tell people my favorite job ever was my first job in tourism, actually. So anyway, yeah, it's a sector that really can excite young people for sure. I'm very pleased now to introduce Matt Thompson. Matt Thompson is the CEO and co-founder of Placemaking P4G, a values-based recruitment company that helps clients to build thoughtful and dynamic teams. Matt's leadership journey has always been rooted in empathy and collaboration, whether through his football career, professional and entrepreneurial career, or his family journey. Matt strives to reflect and honor his values every day, which are to amplify, inspire, and transform. Matt, over to you. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Kevin. And I hate to start with a correction, but allow for me to start with a correction. At the very onset, everybody was told we have a panel of distinguished speakers, but I think Kevin forgot the end of that sentence, which was "and Matt." So great to be here. Great to have this space and appreciate the opportunity to kind of share some of these great talking points. So I'm going to start my timer so I don't talk over. I was told 7 minutes, so we might hear something going off in the background here as we go. And I did just also want to mention, I see in the chat there was Darlene weighed in with Nova Scotia's GTO is available. We actually are an employer who participates in GTO ourselves as an organization, so can confirm that GTO is available for first-year graduates, 25 to 35% of first-year wages for your first year. So any questions on that, let us know, and I can see if I can field that. So my involvement here is as, I guess, both as an employer as well as an employer that works specifically in the employment space. So I'll start with a little bit of a background as to who P4G is. So Placemaking 4G takes a placemaking approach to recruiting, an industry that otherwise has been very commodified when it comes to human resources, what we refer to as human dynamics. And we really create a space, like our purpose as an organization, for instance, is to inspire a values-driven climate where contributors thrive and purpose ignites action. It's all about creating a space where individuals can thrive and belong. And as a result, we have a huge amount of not only successful searches, but retention from a youth as well as from a representation across the spectrum, with over 60% of our roles being filled from individuals from otherwise underrepresented communities within that field. So that's where I work. Our organization is 4 years old, and we sought out to kind of change the narrative here in Atlantic Canada because we saw a huge amount of youth out migration in particular. We also saw that, you know, as a young parent myself, I've got 3 kids, they're 7, 6, and 3. I wanted to be able to create a space where there was opportunities here for individuals to grow and thrive in the Atlantic region. So the reason that that's important is because I want to bring it back to one of our founding, the inspirations behind our foundation, which is pretty much it could be used as the quote for this entire day, which is a quote from the Irony Report. And that quote was, "Nova Scotia is at a crossroads, and the only certainty is the status quo is not an option." So I'll say that again. Nova Scotia is at a crossroads, and the only certainty is that the status quo is not an option. Prior to starting this panel, Candace very eloquently mentioned that there was a work shortage that happened back in the 80s as well. And this isn't the first time this has happened. You know, to that point, the quote from the Irony Report that came out in 2014, that was actually a pulled quote from the Nova Scotia Economic Futures Report from 1991, which goes to show that this is not the first time, it's not our first rodeo here. So what are we going to do about it? So the 2 things that I would mention to anybody on this call, whether you're an employer or an employment supportive organization, are these things. They are values alignment and culture of the workplace when it comes to be able to create a space that individuals want to come and contribute to. And the second is workplace innovation. So our ecosystem, I mentioned Placemaking 4G, actually contains 3 enterprises. One of them is social enterprise Placemaking 4G, the recruitment firm, values aligned recruitment firm. The second is P4GI, which I won't get too much into, but it's P4G immigration. So we have a certified immigration consultant and use that from a recruitment perspective for international recruiting. But the third, and perhaps the most important one to this conversation, is called cluster employment. And the reason that cluster employment came up was because we were having multiple conversations about supporting employers as recruiters from a P4G perspective. And we had multiple employers, particularly in rural Nova Scotia, approach us about how they could utilize our services, but they only had part-time needs. So we said, well, let's do something about that. And ultimately, in partnering with some co-op departments, actually, we created some clustered co-ops where we saw rural employers, 2 or 3 at a time, share a business need and create actually a full-time co-op opportunity, a full-time employment opportunity amongst themselves to be able to allow for, though they may have had restricted budgets, maybe $100 a week, maybe $200 a week, they were able to access, you know, international marketing level talent for 5 hours a week to help their bed and breakfast in New Ross, or to help their social enterprise in Halifax. And the concept of cluster employment was really actually became successful. We actually are a cluster employer ourselves, actually, as well, with 2 other two other employers here in Halifax. And what that solution does is it provides an individual an opportunity to get that varied experience, to be able to get that different kind of experience from a day-to-day basis, but it also allows for them to grow as an individual and allows for them to have access to sustainable employment that provides benefits, because though I may not be able to employ somebody from a full-time perspective, by partnering with somebody, we can collaborate, create a full-time agreement, and provide the all-important benefits so that those 32% of people who leave, as Candace mentioned, for benefits may not do so. So how is this relevant to the tourism industry in particular? Because let's just be honest, we all have the same window. How is that going to work? How are we going to share people? Well, we started in 2000 and get this. This is how perfect the timing was. Between December 2019 and April 2020, we had some agreements on the go with TIMB and some great conversations with some local golf courses here in Nova Scotia to create some clustered employment opportunities that saw seasonal clustering in place. Now, I don't know if you remember what happened in March 2020, but that ended up being put to the back burner for obvious reasons. But the reason I bring that up is when it comes to innovating employment solutions and when it comes to providing solutions to employers, there's a clear opportunity here to explore what seasonal clustering can look like. And when I say seasonal clustering, I mean, if we're looking at a 4 to 5 to 6 month tourism window here in Atlantic Canada, what can be done is that can be paired and partnered with whether it's resorts out west, whether it's resorts down south. There's an opportunity to create clustered opportunities amongst those employers, so there can be an awareness of employment. So we're not coming into April, May, still wondering who's going to apply for these jobs, still trying to figure out if there's anybody going to literally be able to drive the bus, but also to identify and create opportunities that are meaningful for individuals. So from a clustered employment perspective, what we'd be kind of open to exploring is an opportunity to create those relationships from resort to resort, from town, from community to resort out west, for instance, to look at what seasonal clustering can look like, because the bringing it back to the benefit solution and how status quo is not an option. The golf resort that we were looking to partner with said that they surveyed their staff, and over 85% of the staff mentioned that they would leave if they did not change their policies about not having benefits within the first 3 years of employment because it was seasonal employment. However, creating an opportunity where a full-time solution where benefits could kick in after 3 to 6 months as it would in a full-time position would very much change that. So ultimately what it boils down to is there is a solution at hand that would be very interested in exploring with partners out there and be able to kind of drive the bus, as it were, drive the proverbial bus and being able to create those solutions while also inspiring a space where employers are creating a feel and a culture and a space where we won't necessarily fall victim to, my alarm's about to go off, fall victim to the great resignation that we've seen across the board by creating spaces where people feel fulfilled and belonging where they work. So thanks very much. Looking forward to chatting. Over to you, Kevin.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. I think you fit in just very nicely, and I think you demonstrated your expertise and insights in ways that are very valuable. So I'm going to make that point despite your self-derogatory comment. I think you've fit in very nicely. So thanks so much for those observations. And now shift to Nabia Talla. Nabia Talla has over 25 years of experience in leadership roles at Immigration Services Association of Nova Scotia, ISANS, a large multi-service immigrant settlement agency in Atlantic Canada. Currently, as advisor on strategic initiatives, she leads ISAN's research strategy and advises on policy development, sector best practices, institutional knowledge integration, and government relations strategy. She previously held the roles of Manager of Business Development Services and Manager of Communications and Research. Nabia was a valued participant and contributor to the scenario planning sessions hosted in partnership with the Atlantic Canada Cruise Association in September and October of this year. Nabia, thanks so much for joining us again. You've come back. This is great. Thank you. We really appreciate your insights. So I'm looking forward to your comments this morning. Over to you, Nabia.
Thank you, Kevin, and good morning, everybody. I'm very glad. Oops. Am I unmuted now? Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your introduction. And I'm really glad to be here and glad to be the last speaker because these were wonderful presentations. And I think everything that the previous speakers said applies to immigrants. So that is a great lead in for me. I would like to talk about how immigrants can be part of the solution to workforce issues. I think it's really important to remember that immigrants are one strategy, and to think about how we can best maximize the benefits of immigration for this sector. So ISANS is a large settlement agency, the largest in the Atlantic, and I'll talk a little bit more about what settlement agencies do. I'd like to first start by telling you about who's who in immigration, talk about immigrants in the tourism sector and the roles of settlement agencies, government immigration programs, and some points to consider. Immigrants have been already involved in all aspects of the tourism sector. And I think it's very important to remember that immigrants are a diverse group. They are not a monolithic group. And so they may be involved in any aspect of tourism as employers and entrepreneurs, as employees with very specific skill sets and experiences, as well as entry-level employees or part of the supply chain. But all immigrants bring diverse experiences and perspectives and skills that can really contribute to any business. I'd like to clarify the difference between permanent residents and temporary residents. Permanent residents are what we traditionally have called immigrants. These are people who come intending to stay. And it's really important to remember that permanent residents, whom I will call immigrants, have almost all the rights of Canadian citizens. So, for example, when Candace was speaking about programs that are only for Canadians, that would include permanent residents. It's not just Canadian-born people, but also permanent residents. Permanent residents apply to come to Canada under economic streams or family stream or refugee stream. Temporary residents, on the other hand, are here on time-limited visas. So they may apply to stay, they may apply to be permanent residents, but that's not a foregone conclusion. They need to leave the country at the end of their visa if it's not renewed or if they haven't been accepted as permanent residents. And in general, they're not eligible for many settlement services. The provincial governments have provided some support for temporary residents as an incentive to stay in their own province, because as we know, especially in the Atlantic, retention is of prime concern. And so the provincial government's always thinking about how we can retain immigrants in the Atlantic. Temporary residents include temporary workers, international students and graduates, and refugee claimants. So when thinking of hiring newcomers, there is no special process required for permanent residents. It's the same as it is for any Canadian citizen. These are people already intending to stay in Nova Scotia, often already settled here, and they can be recruited through all the usual means, and in addition, through settlement agencies. And I'll speak more about that in a minute. In 2019, ignoring the last 2 years, Nova Scotia accepted 7,580 permanent residents. It's a great number. It's the highest number of permanent residents we've had in our history. At the same time, temporary residents, I'll just jump to the last bullet under temporary residents, we accepted twice as many temporary residents. So it's very understandable that people often confuse the two groups. And the only thing that really is important to remember is that temporary residents have to get a work permit before they can be employed in Nova Scotia. Employers can often facilitate that, and employers need to confirm eligibility for temporary workers to be employed. Most are interested in staying in Canada, and so that's a great advantage for us because the government has now developed programs that facilitate immigration through employment, and I'll mention that in more detail in the coming slides. Temporary residents can be recruited through the usual means or directly from overseas and or in partnership with provincial immigration offices. So that large and very highly motivated group of temporary residents is an important group to consider. Settlement agencies are found across the Atlantic region. There are agencies like ISANS in every major center and some smaller communities, notably throughout New Brunswick. We are not-for-profit and largely government funded. Our focus is newly accepted permanent residents in a wide variety of sectors. And our starting point is our clients. So what I mean by that is we don't work primarily on behalf of employers. We work very much with employers in partnership, but our priority and starting point is our clients. So in addition, we do not recruit people who have not applied to immigrate. We support those who've already started on that path or been accepted. At the same time, some settlement agencies like ISANS do have specific employer support programs. We provide opportunities for employers to recruit through us. We provide English in the workplace for people who have been hired and need specific targeted support for language skills. So we can be a great partner for employers. Government immigration programs have increased in the last few years. The region has been very good at advocating with the government for facilitating and supporting immigration to the Atlantic. So each province across the country has a provincial nominee program that allows them to set the criteria based on the specific economic circumstances of the province. And this is often done in partnership with employers. So for example, the province of Nova Scotia has a market-driven stream of immigration that facilitates immigration for people in the sectors most needed in the province, such as continuing care workers, the hospitality industry, truck drivers. And these streams are flexible. They can be adjusted according to needs. And they're a very valuable tool for employers to be aware of and participate in. It's a very good attraction point for temporary residents and for people who are still overseas to immigrate to our region, because what it involves is once they get a job in the region, then they're on the immigration track automatically. There's also an Atlantic immigration project, formerly a pilot project. It's currently paused because it's been so successful that it is being transformed into a permanent program. And the federal government is working through that process and hopes to reopen the permanent program early in 2022. This is a very clearly employer-driven program where employers hire international skilled workers or international graduates who are here, who want to stay in the Atlantic. Once the person receives a job offer and accepts it, then their immigration application is fast-tracked and supported. The employers in this case must be endorsed by their provincial immigration office. So in both cases, provincial immigration offices are the starting point for participating in government support programs for employing newcomers. Just in general, I'd like to add some points to consider. We've heard often from employers that they're concerned about hiring immigrants because of the immigrants' language skills. And what we've often wanted to point out is that language skill is not all or nothing. For immigrants, they may have very strong skills in speaking and listening in English, not as strong perhaps in reading and writing. And so it's really important for an employer to consider what language skills are needed in the specific position, and to consider if they don't need strong writing skills, for example, that they might want to focus and evaluate just the person's speaking and listening skills. It's also important to remember that a lot of good communication is related to perhaps personality and to soft skills. So somebody can be a great communicator even if they're not the most accurate English speaker. And the focus really, especially I would think in the tourism industry, needs to be on communication. This is not an evaluation of academic English skills when you're thinking of somebody at work. And so a lot of those skills can be culturally determined, and somebody can come across as not being very fluent because they perhaps speak a more formal form of English, or they're not very comfortable with small talk initially. But a lot of these skills can be taught, and with short-term intensive programs. So it's really good to consider communication and be open to supporting an immigrant to develop quickly some of the specific communication skills they need for a job in your sector. The other thing I would like to say, and especially referring to what Matt was saying, immigrants want to build their future. They are adaptable, they're motivated, and they need to see a path ahead. So something like cluster employment for seasonal sectors is really important. If you want to attract immigrants to the tourism sector, you have to remember that they are thinking of building a future for their families. Benefits are important. A future opportunity to move ahead is important. And so the innovative approach that 4G is taking is a great example of new ways to attract and retain newcomers to the region. So I'd like to really encourage employers who are listening to consider recruiting newcomers, to check with local settlement agencies to see if we have clients already interested in working in the sector and how we can support you, and to contact your provincial immigration office about both federal and provincial programs that can help you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Nabia, and thank you to everybody for your outstanding presentations this morning. There's lots of material that you put on the table for us to think about. I would ask anyone with any questions that you post your questions to, is it the Q&A? I want to ask Jocelyn to chime in. I think it's the Q&A, or is Jocelyn going to send me the questions? Now I can't remember.
Yeah, in the Q&A box.
In the Q&A box, we post your questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start us off because I've got many questions I'd like to ask, so I'm going to have to restrain myself a little bit here. But just on this theme that came up with a few speakers, and in fact, Nabia ended on, which was this question about how do we keep bring people into the sector and motivate them and bring them ahead. I'm going to start with you, Candice. Maybe you can offer some thoughts on this question. So how can the tourism sector reconcile this need to professionalize with its dependency on lower wage and seasonal labor? It seems to me this is one of the issues we need to think about in the sector. How do we professionalize, but at the same time we have this insatiable appetite for, there's a downward pressure on wages, and how do we reconcile these two things? Any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, that's a big question. Again, no magic bullet, but for people to start to understand that there are opportunities, I think we have to, educate the masses. I've actually heard a lot from the industry lately about trying to get the image of tourism and its opportunities much more out in the open. I know when I do career fairs, as I mentioned, parents have a big impact on what their son or daughter is going to take at school. Some of them understand the tourism program, and of course others think that their son may end up flipping burgers the rest of their lives. So I think we have to join forces in some manner that will start to educate and show people the opportunities, whether that's anything from newscasts to billboards to whatever it might be. COVID's done us a couple of things. One, it's created doubt because it showed, how the industry can be brought to its knees very quickly. But on the other side, the point, the one thing COVID did do for us, I think it showed how important the industry is. And I think we need to keep that in the forefront of people's minds. Governments all of a sudden recognized how many people work in the industry. So I think we really need to keep building on that. And we know tourism is a highly fragmented industry. We tend to be very competitive with each other. But I think we need to, this is the time we need to come together as a unit.
Thanks, Candace. Matt, I want to bring you in on this point. So is there a relationship, when I think about cluster employment, I guess one of the things that I would consider to be a potential risk for people is this idea that these are kind of one-off positions that they're picking up, kind of gig economy kind of feel to it, and it may not lead to career development. It can, but it might not. It could also go the other way, right? That folks could be exploited just doing, basically seasonal work all the time and picking up jobs here and there, but there's not necessarily a lot of the same kind of momentum that could be lost. So how do we address, is that a possible challenge that we need to think about? How do we address that challenge?
I think it's absolutely, it's a challenge, but absolutely, is there an opportunity to overcome that challenge? For sure. I think there's a couple points there. One, if we're talking about, whether we're talking about new graduates or we're talking about new Canadians or potential immigrants taking on cluster employment positions, what we stand to gain in that process is relationships. Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada is famous for shoulder tapping. What you can do is develop a network working within multiple sectors, working with multiple employers to be able to get to know a space, get to know a sector, get to know an organization. And it's different from the gig economy in that, yes, it's 2 to 3 employers that are collaborating, but it's a full-time position. You're not out there trying to develop your own network, build your own network as a new Canadian, as a co-op student, somebody who doesn't know, Joe down the street. It allows for you to have that full-time position, though it is clustered amongst 2 to 3 employers. And the last thing is, as far as experience is concerned, I know that, from, it wasn't on the cruise ships, it was actually on the train, but my first job in Atlantic Canada was actually working on the train between Moncton and Montreal when I went to Mount A. When it comes to telling stories, what I can say is, speaking to you now as I introduced myself as a father first, husband second, social entrepreneur. We've got 3 organizations, we've got, employees, and it's very, very blessed to be successful in the space that I'm in. But I can also say, I would not be where I was today if I did not learn the customer experience of being trapped in a metal tube with clients for 18 hours on the way to Montreal, because I learned some incredibly invaluable lessons along the way in that situation. So is there a risk? Absolutely. Is there a reward that outweighs the risk? I would argue that there is.
Excellent, thanks. Tony, I want to ask you about, there's been a lot of attention lately on the federal government and continuing its support programs post-COVID, and how long, well, how, actually, maybe we're not post-COVID, right? We're still in the COVID period. You made reference to the fact that the risk, of course, with these employment support programs is it could disincentivize people from returning to work. So what are your thoughts on that? How does the government negotiate this juggernaut that it's in, that it wants to support employment and encourage people back into the workforce, but not too soon? So what are your views on where we're at now and what the government has to be thinking about in order to get us back to where we need to be?
Yeah, that's an important question, Kevin. I mean, this is the, in Atlantic Canada, where you have a crisis moment, right? We have this demographic, crisis, and on the top of that, we have this, public health crisis, and in Newfoundland, we also have economic crisis and physical crisis, right? So that's the reason why the government step in, right? To support, vulnerable people in our society. And so this is what we call unintended outcome, right? So the disincentive effects, and just think about, domestic workers, if they receive the benefits that's similar to their income from the paid employment, right? In restaurants, in, hotels and so on, they would rather stay at home, right? Collect the benefits. So the issue here is that I think, of course, we have to provide also support to our international students, as Candice mentioned that earlier, because many of them are not eligible. So so that certainly, I think, in many ways we should support newcomers, international students, in this arena. So there will be kind of equal playing fields, right? And to fill this labor skill shortages in this critical sector here. Another issue here is that we probably should think about raise the minimum wages, right? And one of the issue here is that we just couldn't track domestic workers to do the job in the sector because they just believe it's the wage is too low, very little benefits and so on. Thinking about wage subsidy and other kind of benefits and so on. Just in terms of career advancement for internationals and newcomers, I think my first job was not in tourism sector. When I was international student, I took a job as a library assistant. I think, at that time, I think it's the best job I can get because, I can read all the books while, I can get paid. So I think one of the benefits by working in the sector is that, you interact a lot of people, right? Every day is different, as someone mentioned, Matt, as someone mentioned. And, you hone your skill, your communication skill, your language skills, and so on, right? We benefit a lot from that. Social network, you mentioned that as well. So I think the issue here is that we need to take concerted efforts, right? I also agree that, this status quo is not an option. Right, we know this is a very competitive industry. Usually pay low wages, close to minimum wage, and I think we need, or as I mentioned in the beginning, all level governments and the industry and settlement agencies and also university should work together, right, to find a solution. So, this one of the policy dilemma in this area, immigration, is that the temporary foreign workers typically take job in this. They're more than willing to take a job in this sector. And we also did recently a cross-province consultation in Newfoundland, Labrador, and 90% of them would like to stay, but no clear path for them to make transition from permanent resident to temporary, from temporary resident to permanent residence. And the visa application for the spouse or children will be delayed, which is a very, significant issue for us. International students, they are highly educated, energetic. They have exposure to local language and culture and so on. The ideal candidate is permanent residence. There's pathway for them to make such transitions. For example, Canadian experience class. The issue here, the complaint is that they couldn't find job that match their credential and education. Right, we have very low retention rate for international students in Atlantic Canada, lower than 20%. So this is other issues the government should invest more in internship, co-op, right? Paid internship, co-op, and hopefully can also, find a placement, in those sectors that actually lead them, right? And also for skilled immigrants, the issue here is that they have a lot of options, right? There's already a competition within Canada. Of course, we're also competing with Australia, US, and so on and so forth. So again, they have a lot of options. We need to, put more investment to help them to settle, to find meaningful employment. Also, many of you have mentioned that clustered employment. I totally agree with that, an option, right? So I think it is an interesting job. It is a challenging job in the tourism sector, but we just have to make it more meaningful. There's kind of a career path for recent immigrants, internationals working in the sector. I still remember in the construction sector, we face similar kind of challenges when the workers very mobile, right? The construction union would work together. This is concerted efforts, right? To provide a joint training program, right? Pension benefits, right? Skill development programs. And I think in this sector, we need to do the same things. Again, I really applaud for Kevin for organizing this panel discussion, to enrich, the perspective, the worst perspective from different sectors. Settlement agency, we talk about, industry, the university sectors and policymakers and researchers. And so, if we can work together, I think there's a way out of this crisis.
Thank you, Tony. Some excellent thoughts there. Lots of content. Thank you. Nabi, I want to bring you, I've got a question posted for Matt. I'll come back to Matt in a sec, but I want to try to get in a couple of questions in the last couple of minutes. But two quick thoughts from you, maybe if I can ask you to do that, Nabia. One is this question that Tony has raised about structuring a pathway from one settlement or the one program to the next. And then something a little bit less pleasant, which is the issue that's been reported in the Globe and Mail recently in the southwestern Ontario. I mean, we probably wouldn't be shocked to hear this, but it's uncomfortable and we need to think carefully about it. It seems to me there's a lot of optimism about immigration addressing our problems. And then we read stories about immigrants being not treated very well when they are here, that maybe too many solutions are kind of put on the plate of immigration, but then we're not really respecting them in the way that we should. And so this has gotten a bit of profile in the Globe and Mail recently about southwestern Ontario, though I don't want to sort of say that it's just a southwestern Ontario problem. I wonder if you might comment on that also, about how we engage with immigrants in a way that's respectful and also kind of provide them with the support that they require. But anyway, Tony's point about the transition between programs, immigrant programs, and then the second thought about supporting immigrants and avoiding these kinds of problems of exploitation that seem to be happening in the recruitment process of immigration.
Good questions. Talking about pathways, one of the challenges is that recently, or not just in the past 10, 20 years, the focus of Canadian immigration has been to bring in highly educated, highly skilled people, while our needs are really at entry-level position in many sectors. And this has caused a bit of a conflict on the ground, because many immigrants are coming in with very sophisticated credentials and not always able to use them. And employers need people at entry level or with some trade skills or other basic experiences, not necessarily years of university. So the provincial governments are trying to address that. I think they are our best hope at this point, because they are able to be more flexible than the federal government with their programs, and they feel on the ground the actual needs of the employers, and they have been trying to work closely with employers. So I think that there is a lot of potential at the provincial level for creating those pathways. And I think the provincial governments are trying to do that. So I would highly recommend more interaction with the provincial governments to create some creative pathways. And partnership, I think, is key. And perhaps that the tourism sector would have to go beyond to other sectors that are maybe focused on interaction with the public. Perhaps people who work in continuing care after a couple of years would like a change. And maybe we can think in terms of suggesting to people, well, you have people skills, you can use them in this sector or in this sector. Maybe you can move between sectors. Just off the top of my head. With regard to not respecting immigrants, it's a real problem. And I think that first of all, the most important thing is just to remember that immigrants are just like us. Immigrants are people with families, with all the same aspirations as anybody else has. They want to secure a future in Canada. They want to belong. They want to contribute. And I think that sometimes we talk about immigrants almost as tools. We talk about immigration as a solution. Well, immigration is just one part of a solution. And we really need to remember that immigrants have all the needs that all the rest of us do. If there's something that a Canadian-born worker wouldn't put up with, an immigrant shouldn't put up with that either. I don't know what to suggest there beyond education, some enforcement where it's possible, although that's challenging. But I think a reminder and advocating on behalf of immigrants that they have the same needs and aspirations as all residents of Canada.
Thanks very much for that, Nabia. We have about 1 minute left, Matt. I'm going to turn to you because I know there was a question posted. Do you have and I think you've maybe addressed it, but I'm just going to hand it to you if you've got a final thought on the question that was asked.
Yeah, I think I might have answered it to everybody in the chat, not knowing how that works. But the question was, is there a concern for employers to kind of overstretch themselves? I'm kind of using my own contextualizing of it because it's now disappeared and I don't know how to get it back. But is there a concern for employers to overstretch themselves if they commit to too many multiple or full-time cluster roles? And my suggestion was, if an employer is projecting, at a low end 6, at a high end 20 number of employees they'd be needing over the course of the year, I certainly wouldn't go after and create 20 clusters within my organization because it's not financially feasible. But I would consider a lower number than that to then at least be able to be 75% of the way there, for instance, of where you need to be at the high end. It is a solution similar to, I just want to say, I'm so happy to hear you say that, Nabiha, because we're talking about solutions here, but these aren't point final. These aren't end of the line solutions. What these are components of a solution that can make up a greater solution to be able to find ourselves out of this problem, which I think, to use Tony's example, I think it's absolutely possible. Just have to put our heads together and do it. So I think there's some solutions at hand here.
I want to say thanks so much to our panel today. This has been an extremely interesting conversation. Lots of great content. This is recorded. It'll be on the McEachern Institute website for you to watch at your leisure and share with your colleagues. And I encourage you to do so. I would also like to thank the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency for their partnership in our recent project with the cruise industry. I would also like to thank the Atlantic Canada Cruise Association, especially Sarah Rumley and Nicole McCauley for their ongoing collaboration and their work together over the last year on these very important and challenging times for the tourism sector and the cruise industry in particular. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, and we really enjoyed our time today. So thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you again at the McEachern Institute next time. Thanks so much.